Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and today I want to talk about adventure structures, adventure design. I'm going to focus a little bit on the investigative and the NPC-driven adventure. I was originally going to give a whole sweeping thing on all these different, and I don't know, I'd rather just kind of talk about these two for right now. So we do a lot of investigative adventures, a lot of mystery adventures, and the reason why is, number one, I think they work very good for a module. It's a lot of other adventure types can be difficult for me to put into a generic book for everybody's campaign. They're somewhat specific to mine, but investigations I find work pretty well for you hand people the basic investigation, they can run it. Same thing for things like dungeons or monster hunt type adventures. But so investigations are the ones that I usually use for our published material, and they're ones that I really like to run personally. And I think that goes back to me, sort of cutting my teeth on Ravenloft and running a lot of investigative, research-based adventures, and Cthulhu as well. So, obviously, there's a classic problem that a lot of people run into with investigations, and that's the breakdown when players don't find the clue to get to the next leg of the adventure. And I think there are a number of valid approaches to that, and it's really about fitting the approach that you like to your style of play. So the Alexandrian has a really good breakdown of it. I think it's called the 3-clue rule. If it's called something by another title, I'll correct that in the notes. And Robin Laws has a whole system for his Gumshoe game that is that basically addresses that issue. And I don't think either one's better or worse. I just think they're different approaches. And so it's really about finding the approach that fits your style. I think if you think more in terms of scenes, you want to go more with the Robin Laws approach. If you think more in terms of events and locations and things like that, then maybe the Alexandrian approach. Now, my approach, I certainly take elements of that rule of 3, because I do think you have to have enough clues that it's not going to just be like, oh, well, there's one clue here and it's a choke point in the game. At the same time, I take the approach that it's okay if the players fail at the investigation. It's okay if they don't find the bad guy or whatever. I do think the adventure still should be exciting, and so I usually build in opposition forces in the adventure that are going to make sure that happens. And it's usually in the form of a countdown of some kind towards a disaster. But also just the way that I tend to run games. My players want to just shrug their shoulders and move on to something else, they can. But I think, importantly, I don't think in terms of scenes. So when you're not thinking in terms of scenes, that just doesn't quite come up as much as when you are thinking in terms of scenes, because it's not, well, you can't get to this scene until you have this clue. It's I sort of structure investigations the same way I might structure a setting. It's like a mini setting, and I think, okay, here's what happened, here's the history, here's the crime, here's this area, this sort of this crime scene in the investigation site. Here's another investigation site. Here's another investigation site. Here's a cast of people that are involved. And I usually have so much of that stuff that there's always someplace else the players can go to sort of find a clue or figure things out. And I adapt to what the players want to do. So I'm not gonna give them clues that they didn't earn. But if they come up with something that I hadn't thought of that would plausibly yield a clue, then I'll give it to them. And I find that generally works. I think especially having that cast of NPCs, because it's not always about going to a place and looking for a physical clue. A lot of times it's about going and speaking to somebody and finding out information. And sometimes it's people you didn't even think of in advance. So you have to be willing to adapt. If they go to an alleyway that was like one street over, and they say, hey, I'm going to go to the local shops and ask people if they heard anything. If it's reasonable that somebody would have heard something, you should probably come up with something that fits the events that you have established. So that's how I like to do it. That's how I did it in most of our Terror Network modules and Beneath the Banshee Tree. And I find that, for me, that works. I don't know if it's going to work for everybody. Like I said, the Gumshoe approach, a lot of people like, and I think that's a really interesting system for handling that very problem. So I think if you think more in terms of like genre and scene, that's a good way to go. And if you think more along what I'm describing, what I'm suggesting here should work, or go check out the Alexandrian. Really check out everything, because there's investigations are a really fun approach. But even if you decide, oh, you know what, yeah, Brendan, he knows what he's talking about, I'm going to do what he's saying. You might have players who can't stand that style of play, and so rather than fight an uphill battle, go find somebody else's advice that resonates with them. So I'm a big believer in understanding, and adapting to the group that you have at the table, because ultimately that's who you're playing to. You're not playing to sort of an abstract gaming ideology. As useful as those can be sometimes, they can also become walls that sort of separate us and make us lock us into habits that we can't get out of. So I think so for me, like I said, I've sort of laid out my style of how I like to do it. But I have a couple of players that I know appreciate a good story, a good plot development in the game, and so I inject some of that into it, because I know that that's what they're there for, and I'm not gonna deprive them of that. As long as everybody else is fine with it, I don't see an issue. So I think for investigations, it's really important to address how you get around that potential problem, because it is a potential problem, and it's something that if you might decide, well, you know what it is, but I don't care if the adventure crashes to a halt. It crashes to a halt. That's fine. That's good, but you just want to make sure that you've decided and you've thought about it, because I have been in games where that's happened, and it's the players get really frustrated if you're not clear about your approach. So yeah. But again, what I've found is if I have enough if I treat the investigation itself as a setting and as a little bit of a sandbox, that just seems to work. I've been doing it now for, I don't know. I mean, this precise method I've been doing for about 10 years now. And I was doing something much more rough that was sort of like a proto version of this, the preceding 10 years. And so I've really not really run into any problems with it. And I think the key is the timeline, the robust number of persons of interest, and being willing to adapt to changing circumstances and to what approaches the players are taking. So those are my thoughts on investigations. I'll probably revisit it at some point when I'm a little more energized. So the next thing I want to talk about is sort of NPC living adventures, where the motives and goals of the NPCs are what drive things. So like I think I had mentioned this when I was talking about investigations, I don't generally think in terms of scenes or even really events. Sometimes I will think of events, but primarily everything in my campaigns flows through the motivations of the villains and NPCs. And that really comes from, again, probably goes back to Ravenloft, where the big advice that I took from it was make your villain first, and everything should come from the villain. And so I do that with everything. So if I don't say, the village of Siu is going to be taken over by Lord Frog, and then this is going to happen, and then that is going to happen, and then and then an army from the north. No, I say Lord Frog wants to take over Siu because he wants the immortal killing sword. And he wants to eat some people while he's there, and then maybe have some fun, and then he's going to play it by ear, and then I'm just going to think, okay, is there anybody in the area that might object to that? And so that's who has the resources to deal with it. That's how I'll sort of think of it, and for me it works because it's really a memory issue. It's like I don't like to remember I have all these different events coming up that I have to think of. My memory's not as good as it used to be. I don't like to do that. So if I think in terms of characters, it's much easier for me to think, oh, okay, yeah, Lord Frog is doing this, so this would have happened. It's just an easier method. It's almost the same result, but for me, it's like a nice little mental trick that does two things. It gets around the memory issue, and it doesn't create sort of a I don't like doing sort of structured adventures that kind of go from one thing to the next, or you know, even if they have multiple pathways. I don't really like that approach, and so it gets around that approach. It's more it just feels more character driven to me, and so for me that's how I like to run a lot of my campaigns. And you know, and again, you can still have really incredible plots and action with that. It just kind of comes from the characters. So like, I did something that was inspired loosely by the Flying Guillotines, and you know, one of the sects that the party had a grudge with, sort of, you know, through another group, you know, put together this flying guillotine army after they invented the flying guillotine, and started cutting off the heads of people, and so they were finding bodies all over the place. And eventually, this group decided they wanted to lay a trap for them at an inn. And so it just kind of all unfolded organically. It wasn't like, oh, I know they're going to go to this inn, and then they're going to go here, then they're going to confront the guys at this manor house. I just allowed things to sort of naturally unfold. And as the players did things, I would say, okay. Like, for example, one of the players intercepted the mastermind at one point, and that wasn't something that I thought was going to happen. And this character didn't know the mastermind within the setting. They had never met before. And so the mastermind kind of, you know, tried to feel him out and tried to act like he was his friend, and went and bought him some wine at an inn, and was, you know, really nice to him. And so, you know, this whole other little thing developed from there. So I just, again, I think, you know, for me, if I had to reduce campaigns and adventures to one element, it would be NPC motivation. That's really what drives so much of what I do in my games on a regular basis, and it's what keeps them going, I think. And when I lose sight of that I've run into problems. When I think, this campaign feels a little dry, what's going on? It's often when I've come up with these fabulous adventures that look great on paper, but don't really play with the motivations of existing NPCs and things like it. It's just sort of like I have this great set piece, and it's something that I could post on the blog or put a module out, but it's not really giving any fuel to the campaign. So I've learned that sometimes, you know, sometimes a great adventure is actually the worst thing you could do for a campaign. I've had some adventures that I was like, wow, that's inspired, and then they really suck the steam out of a campaign. So anyways, I have to go because my wife is calling me, but I will hopefully post more on this subject. I want to talk more about investigations, but for now, I think just covering those two is good enough. And I'm also going to talk about dungeons again, and talk about monster hunts, which I know are related to investigations, but I think they're their own thing, and I want to discuss them. So all right. Until then, have a good day.